wish a Coke was still cola. It was back when the country was strong. And back before Elvis and before the Vietnam War came along. Before the Beatles and yesterday, when a man could still work and still would. The best of the good life behind us now. And is America really over for good?
All right. Happy New Year, my friend. Welcome back.
Happy New Year.
About your song, Johnny, we've still got Texas.
We still got Texas. That's right. Bring them all to Texas.
I agree. So I'm excited. I'm excited that we're back. It was great to have a break. I did get to catch up on some sleep and some chores in the house, but I do miss our weekly talks. So I'm glad that we're back. Llewelyn, how are things at home? How is the weather? What's going on? Tell me about the break real quick. Your break.
We had some. We're doing very well. With the same frustration that everybody else. The high point in our week is going to the supermarket. We drive around every day. We call it drive at 5, but we have to do it earlier because of the dark. And we're lucky because we live in Rhode Island, and it's a visual joy. Rhode Island is, from seasons to extraordinary architecture. But we're like everybody else, and my wife and I, Linda, are grateful that we've got each other and that we have a home and enough to eat and enough work to do.
There you go. Johnny?
I have been very, very busy over my break with startups and companies moving to Austin, Texas. I'm very fortunate to live in the best city in the world, Austin, Texas. But what a tremendous amount of work it takes to bring all of these companies in here. There's been a great strain on housing, a great strain on other kind of services. Like Llewelyn, I'm happy to have a roof over my head and happy to be economic, secure, and happy to do all these things. I'm a bit sad about my country this morning as a former presidential appointee myself and a decorated Vietnam veteran. I never thought that I would see what I'm witnessing on television. Actually, it was a shocking after my wife woke me up and said, "You better look at what's happening on TV," and it was 9/11. So the break has been work for me, and the staying at home has been pretty interesting. But I'm glad to be back and see my two good friends here.
Yeah, well, I think that I had a long things that we could talk about what's going on in digital transformation. But let's talk about real quick for our audience sake. Let's talk real quick about our thoughts on what's happening in Capitol Hill today. Llewelyn?
Well, yeah, this has been stirred up. It's been coming a long time. If you tell a group of people something, and it's a case of tell the old enough, the big enough lie long enough, some people will believe it. And there are people who feel very disenfranchised, very unhappy with the course of the culture, the course of the nation, and they have been riled up by the President of the United States, who today, earlier in the day, almost told them to go and riot. He came very close to it. And they're doing that, and that is very unfortunate. The Capitol is very special to reporters who work in Washington, as I did for 50 years. It was the one place we could go and be part of the system, whether we worked for the smallest and most irrelevant publication or had a great newspaper behind us. You were somehow an equal person in the press setup at the Congress. When you walked into the Congress, you were important. You walked into history. You felt yourself a part of history. And why this is, I don't know, but I've never felt that same way about the White House, the Congress. That building alone, the Capitol building, is so extraordinary. And to see it, the subject of rioting, to see it locked down is very painful. It's symbolic as well as being a very emotional reminder of who we are and what we do. I often tell this story, but we were in the north of Ireland once, and the young man who was running the hotel said, "I'm sorry, I won't be here to see you tomorrow because I'm taking my sister to Washington." I said, "Why would you take your sister to Washington?" And he said, because he wanted her to see the Capitol, to see the Congress, to see how you could have a system of government in which minorities could be heard in a way that they cannot under the parliamentary system. And somehow I was very moved by that. I was very taken. I spent a fair amount of time in parliamentary systems and the House of Commons. It's a different atmosphere. You also are a part of history, but it's so absolute. You're this party or you're that party. And I've seen a disintegration of the collegiality of Congress as it's become more tribalized. And it began way back in the 1990s with my friend Newt Gingrich, who I know quite well. He asked me to help him with his writing once upon a time. I told him he spoke well, so he probably wrote well. I didn't want to do it, actually. It's a very sad, it's a very, very symbolically sad day. We have, in a way, lost another area of innocence, the capital of the United States.
John?
Building itself had an innocence.
Absolutely. You know, there's nothing wrong with turning on the television and watching protests. It has almost become a part of American life, and it has been a part. But to turn it on and watch it scar the traditions of America, the Capitol and the White House and all those traditions is rather shocking. And of course, we've learned a number of things in this historic kind of situation. So I think that the president has destroyed himself, has had a big impact on destroying the Republican Party, and I say that as a registered Lincoln Republican myself. And also, more importantly, has scarred the American institutions. That is, you cannot have someone who does not know how to lose. The only thing that's worth protesting is the interference call that did not allow the Saints to go to the Super Bowl. Otherwise, all of the other things that he's engaging in just not must make sense. You know, Llewelyn, is like me losing a soccer match. Instead of shaking someone's hand, I start to fight them. And what we've learned in America is that you have to have a peaceful transition of power. It's like I'm looking at another country. I'll ask the question now, when there is an invasion around the globe, when there are floods around the globe, who's going to come save them? That's what we do.
And you've got to respect your own systems. You've got to respect your own traditions. If you respect your traditions, you have nothing.
You're exactly right.
If you don't shake hands after the boxing match or the soccer match or whatever match it is, any sense of the purpose of that, the non, has gone away. If you are a sore loser, you hurt both sides.
Absolutely. So it's a sad day for America. It's a great day for political scientists to study it, but it's a bad day for America.
Yeah. I concur with you, gentlemen, but let me get back to where things are. I mean, a lot has happened in the last weeks, and COVID-19 continues to plod along, and the death toll continues to grow at a 13,000 per week pace, and it's slightly trending down. Cases are up also in we over 20 million nationwide, and it's trending up a little bit. The last week was 1.5 million new cases. So I know that some of the drugs there's all kinds of plans for distribution. I understand that there's all kinds of hiccups, and they're trying to figure it out what to do with all that. Let me get from you two real quick. Where are we on COVID, and what does it look like the next 6 months?
It looks very grim for the next month, very grim indeed. In fact, one thing is not going to be what's happening in Washington today. It's going to be the almost out of control death toll, and it's going to shape everything. We're going to wake up with an enormous sense that suddenly we've lost 400,000 Americans to a disease, and it's going to be tied in with the sense that the departing administration mismanaged it. Today is going to heighten that sense, but it probably will reach a day in about a month when we realize that we're at war and we need the same disciplines as during a war, that it's not optional, that you don't go to crowded places or hold rallies or do other truly foolish things until such time as we've gotten everybody vaccinated. And we're going to have a huge look at where the breakdowns have been. It's not just been the federal government. The states themselves have not done a good job in handing out the vaccines they have, the supplies they have. Some of them are perishing from old age before they've been stuck into people's arms, and we need to do that. We need more efficiency, we need federal direction, but we also need a lot more responsibility and a sense of urgency from the states. It has been.
Yeah, John?
Yes, you know, we have gone from wow, there is a disease, to wow, now we have a cure, but now we have something that can really delay the disease or help us out. And the supply chain. So we've gone from where is the science? We know we now have the science. Let me put the science in my arm. Let me get a vaccination. And also we've gone to how can I get it? Can you imagine all of a sudden where everybody's hungry and there's lots of food, or you have been promised lots of food to do away with the hunger? So what people have done, I think, is to look at their expectations, and they have, for the most part, gotten back on airplanes, have really upped their scale of what they wanted to do, while we search for a supply chain for the vaccine. So I think that if we look at the general planning of what we do, and let's be fair, we've never had to have a supply chain to vaccine lots of people, to vaccinate lots of people, right? In this century. But you know, we should be able to improve on the supply chain. And I think this should have been at a national level myself. I don't think it should have been sent straight to the states. I think this is the equivalent of war for the vaccination of people. So we've gone, well, we need something, we have something, and the supply chain is not there. And I think it kills the spirit on the one hand. On the other hand, it also allows people to say, well, I'm just going to violate all the masks and all of the things that's required to stay safe.
Yeah. It reminds me, I don't know if you all remember, but when Puerto Rico had their disaster with Hurricane Maria, and we started sending relief, water and supplies. The mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, instead of allowing the supplies to get distributed as they should have been, that she was hoarding the supplies in a warehouse. It's like, it's kind of crazy. God knows why she was doing that. But those are the kind of things that I wonder if we have our act together on this episode here of that.
You know, if we are shocked,
the stock market.
Sorry, if we
Go
are
ahead.
shocked at what's happening in Washington, we should be shocked at what is happening in Los Angeles, where ambulances are driving around looking for somewhere that they can take sick people because the hospitals are flooded. That is a catastrophe, a crisis, and we should have been able to predict it and avoid it. Another failure. We need to take a hard look at us and see why we're coming unstuck at the seams in so many various ways.
Yeah. So nevertheless, of all this crisis and fragility of our system, which we have in the past, you know, the economy, the recovery continues to be on its way, and the future expectations on the market is that things are going to trend up with the new administration, and things are going to get better, and 2021 will be a much better year, and price of crude oil has jumped up some $3, almost $4, $3.57, which means, you know, the oil guys are at full throttle, extracting oil and producing oil. Price of gasoline has gone up 19 cents in the greater Austin area. We had in December of jobs, 123,000, no surplus, reduction. So the total creation of jobs since the recovery began in May, it's 11.3 million. So we're still underwater. I think that we had lost 22 million jobs, if I remember the number correctly. So lots of work to be done to get back to normal, if that will ever happen. And clearly, we have discussed many times that there is a divide going on in terms of digitalization and non-digital jobs and retraining possibilities. And so what are you all thinking now that you had the time for the break and the expectations and hopes of a new administration reshuffling or maybe redirecting some of the areas of focus for investment? What are you guys' take on the next 12 months, 18 months of recovery? Llewelyn?
You know, what's very, very interesting is this. I think that, like you said, it's according to where you are in the economy. But I wonder, when the policy is right, what is the relationship between who is president and the performance of the American economy? That is, we must ask different kinds of countries. Are they correlated with each other? Do we have to have policy? Certainly, we need lots of policy on lots of things. But what we're seeing here is a really running by certain parts of the economy, whereas the management in DC is going through crisis. So from a scholarly point of view, we have to ask, what is the relationship between the merchants of America and Washington, DC? It's the old question of where's regulation? Should we really be regulated? So I have the sense that two things have happened. First of all, Washington, D.C. became a disaster over the last number of years. Second, there were lots of entrepreneurial projects going on all around America, indeed all around the world. And third, people started looking to the market for their solution rather than a political solution. So what we've learned here as the economy tries to come back, to what part of our solution belongs in politics, and to what part of our solution do we just take to the market, this huge market that is global in nature? To put it very, very simple, should we rely completely on the policies of Washington, D.C. as a central kind of agency, or shall we make sure that those who are entrepreneurial and those who create companies and scale companies, that they continue to do well in spite of the politics?
I'm in agreement with you almost all the way. Traditionally, the economy has done better under Democrats very frequently than it has under Republicans, but business has always felt that Republican administrations are on their side. I've asked the Chamber of Commerce about this and various big-time lobbyists in Washington for industry, and they sort of laugh, acknowledge, and nonetheless put all their effort into electing Republicans. This time it's a bit different. I think there are several pitfalls ahead of the Biden administration. One is to be too concerned with reversing what Trump has done. That could be very time-wasting, very destructive. The other one is, to what extent will he be influenced by the far left of the Democratic Party? And I must say, I have my doubts about the kind of ethnic spoils system that has prevailed in appointing the cabinet. I rather prefer the idea that we have meritocracy than that we want to have an African-American for this job, an Asian American for that, a Pacific Islander for another. That's not how you get things done. That looks pretty, but it's got nothing to do with the effective running of a government. I think that it will be a good year. I think business will bounce back, but it will bounce back because it is very creative. And we have an enormous number of new inventions about to come to market. Things are changing. Andre would like to point out 5G. I can tell you it's happening everywhere. It's happening in manufacturing. It's happening in AI. It's happening in whole new products coming to market. Even in journalism, things like Axios is a new product that came to market in recent years because of the internet. And there's going to be a huge surge of globalization. It's not going away. It's now the future of the earth. The downside is the fear that in order to try to do the right thing, the new administration may do the wrong thing. It may overregulate, which is always an inhibition, unless it is really needed. Somebody pointed out to me, and I thought it was very valid, that the new Secretary of Transportation, mostly known as Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is a very brilliant man, but who said that he saw it as a job creator. Transportation should be about transportation. Let the jobs come, they will follow. And if you start by trying to save jobs or make new jobs, you won't have very good transportation. And if you want to know how that dynamic works, look at what the Brits did with their car industry, with their motorcycle industry, where they worried about jobs, not about the product. Get the product right and the jobs follow. Get the jobs right and the product will perish. Make up your mind which you want.
Good.
You sound like Steve Jobs. So,
well,
I concur with what you guys say. John, you had a comment? Go ahead.
Yes, well, I think, I certainly agree with you. I think that in terms of the politics, but what we've got to do is to understand that the consciousness of the American people sometimes switch from where everything comes from. A lot of American people really think that it's important to have a certain person in a political position to create jobs. I happen to think that jobs come from science, and of course, government can fund the production of science. I think that Microsoft is a computer science company. I think Southwest Airlines is the science of flight. I think peanut butter is the science of peanuts. So I think as we go forward, we must keep this in mind, and we must also understand that a change in administration does not necessarily allow us to take away our will to compete, because I get the feeling sometimes that there is a competition between what government can do for you versus what you must do for yourself. And I think that's the dichotomy that we're in now.
I think any regulation that protects those already entrenched should be removed, and any regulation that inhibits the new, the progressive, the interesting should be applied very carefully indeed. Now, regulation does work, and it's sometimes necessary. Mm-hmm. It's necessary in making sure that we don't get dangerous medicines on the market.
Right.
I tend to think the regulatory system has served the natural monopoly system of electric generation quite well. Some mistakes here and there, but overall it's worked quite well. There are places where regulation is quite effective. In fact, in the utility industry, regulation was so effective that when a lot of them deregulated in the 1990s, they found life was much worse in the cold than it was in the warm and cuddly regulatory world, where if you needed money, you went to the man and said, give us more money, i.e. rate increases. They found all sorts of things. It was harder to get rate increases. Money cost more. They had to pay more to borrow money because they were not protected against going broke, which had been the case heretofore. So there's good and bad in regulation. The thing about a regulation is say what it is and leave it in place so everybody understands it if it's constructive. Some of the environmental regulations have been very constructive. We've cleaned up emissions amazingly as a result of regulation, whether it is with outboard motors or with the CAFE standards for cars. They work, and they stimulated creative engineering, but they've got to be constant and stay in place. They can't be put on and removed depending on what administration has come into power. I think the challenge for Biden is going to be to keep the left wing of the Democratic Party, so important in its thinking these days, from running away and turning us into a regulated nation, because we'll pay a high economic price if that is done that way they would like to see.
Yeah. So let me turn to where we are on some of the transformational things that are driving us. Llewelyn mentioned 5G, one of my favorite topics. So 5G is in South Korea over the last 3 weeks had declared that their subscriber base internally of users actually being serviced 5G technology. It's 11 million subscribers. We know that 5G is somewhat available in the US, and I did share in our last show last day of the year that I had a 5G phone, but our service is kind of spotty still, the capability, but it's being built, and the carriers are providing investing in upgrading their infrastructure from LTE to 5G. Interestingly enough, Ericsson has signed a multi-year contract in Qatar, Indonesia, Algeria, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Palestine, Tunisia, Myanmar, and the Maldives for 5G services. Brazil is moving far along in the same way. 12 cities in Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brasilia, Belo Horizonte, Rio de Janeiro, Curitiba, and many more are offering 5G services. And China has shared that they have deployed over 600,000 5G base stations across the country. So there is definitely a race. 5G is coming. It's going to be another canopy that integrates with everything that is existing, Wi-Fi and LTE and other technologies, but it's going to really accelerate and unleash innovation like never before. So just sharing that, and then let me switch to smart buildings real quick, because it's also dominated by 5G. The group Saab, that makes automobiles and airplane engines and things, is deploying 5G private networks in all their infrastructures. They're also in charge of deploying 5G network technology inside Airbus and Boeing factories worldwide. So the big airline companies are leveraging the use of 5G to manage their network use inside their own buildings and globally. Honeywell is launching a new solution for small, medium-sized buildings on 5G, where they are claiming that customers will save 30% on energy management by having these real-time controls of all their assets. And Mobilité is deploying 5G in Puerto Rico at the convention center and many places. Nokia has gotten an agreement to deploy private 5G networks in Germany in multiple research centers. So clearly, gentlemen, as a backbone of enabling things, innovation, new business models, new startups, this whole notion of bringing 5G and stitching it as the core platform in terms of water, energy, power, telecommunications, right? It's being injected into the fabric very fast, and I can only imagine that it will have some very powerful, significant inputs and results for us. So, any thoughts and comments on? I don't think, Llewelyn, I don't think it's hype anymore. It's happening, right? So, what are you?
Well, it's happening, but I think in a way you're expecting too much of it. It's part of the backbone infrastructure of the country, of many countries, will be of many corporations and processes. So what? This is not something new and revolutionary in bringing something fabulous. The other thing I would like to discuss, or at least have people think about, is what are going to be the new inventions that are not magnetic electro, that are not, I missaid that are not connected to the internet, that are not electromagnetic. That's what I should have said. All of new technology tends to be electromagnetic, but other things are happening. 3D printing, for example, which we've come to take for, is changing a great deal. You're going to be able to make products in your home and sell them. You can buy a little 3D 3D computer now, and you can make stuff at home. You can even choose what you're going to make it in. You simply mix it with the emulsifier or whatever they call it, and off you print it. You need some technological skill, primarily with a computer, but that's going to change a lot. I was out at a very large manufacturing company in California, and they were making parts for compressors by printing. This is a big step forward. It's somewhat off the electromagnetic. Computers are part of it, but computers are part of everything. From a physical, we're seeing a huge amount of movement in nuclear power, from small modular reactors to a lot of private money going into fusion. Like many people who've been around the nuclear business for a long time, I have my doubts about whether we'll ever see fusion, but private money is going into it, and that's usually a good sign. We're seeing new developments in aviation, particularly electric airplanes. They're not here today, but they're going to be here. And we are seeing new ways of storing electricity, which would be a huge step forward. We've seen a new interest in hydrogen. I'm running a press in the United States Energy Association at the end of next week on that subject of hydrogen, because large companies like American Arizona Public Service have a big nuclear base load coming from their Palo Verde 4,000 megawatts, and they have a lot of solar power in Arizona, but they can't match these up. They've got too much solar power during the day and none at night, but the nuclear has to run all the time. Their answer is to back up everything with hydrogen, which they can run through. This is very large development. These are changes, real world changes beyond what we get out of telephones. And it's going to be very important. It's going to happen everywhere. But I would like to bring the conversation back. You can get excited about the future, as I am excited about the future, but you have to be brought down to earth when you see huge lines of people waiting 12 hours at a food bank. That bring you down to earth and want you to think of a way of connecting that technology to those people. I
agree. John?
Well, let's call this the 5G digital industrial complex. It's rolling, it will be great. But let me ask a different kind of question. What happens when your bad brother gets a hold to the same kinds of technology? So on the one hand, we look at all the great things that 5G would do, and that's a good brother. What about his bad brother? That's a good brother. What we will see are lots of opportunities, because remember, when we talk about airplanes, they can be hacked.
Right.
We talk about smart cities, they can be hacked. When we talk about bank accounts, they can be hacked. When we talk about nuclear weapons, they can be hacked. So the digitalization of the world and binding them together would create opportunities not only for those people with mad minds, but those people who will protect us against those bad minds. So can you imagine with me getting on a flight from Chicago to London, and they announce also that we have the protection so that the airplane would not be hacked? So I think that 5G will bring, as it is now, is doing a lot of great stuff, but we have to really think about all of the protection that's going to come with it. So what's going to happen is there will be an entire industry, just as there was the Texas Rangers that evolved in the late 1800s, just like there was Wells Fargo that evolved and all the protection there. And so as we really celebrate all of the changes and the efficiency, then we must also celebrate what it's going to take to really protect us. So the other thing, yeah, let's talk about how, if you look at what you presented, it's international. It is, and people will create different kinds of conflicts. What does it mean when we are connected to X country and there's an outbreak of war? What does it mean when somebody would say, well, this person was assassinated, now this person will be assassinated? What does it mean when a rocket can come knock on my door and look at me and say, oh, you're not the person that I'm looking for, and go to the next door and knock on, and then it's boom. So with 5G would come unintended consequences that will have to exist on the international warfare front. And also the question is, as Llewelyn has said, what will it do for the basic needs of human beings? That is, how do we shelter, how do we eat, and how do we live?
Agreed.
I would totally like to, I agree with that totally, but I would like to point out that what you're talking about is defense, and the nature of our defenses has to change. We have just passed a $7 billion defense budget. Focuses on aircraft carriers, battle groups, things which may be obsolete in the age of drones and cyber attack.
Right.
It is very possible we can be brought to our knees without single ballistic action. It can be done electronically. And that whole new world, we need to look at that defense budget and maybe take $2 or $3 billion and divert it to the new threats, the new defense, and also what will be the new weaponry, which will be our use of those systems to hobble our enemies.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let me take a pause here and do a plug for our annual conference coming up. We're gonna do our best to try to have it face to face with all the COVID restrictions and safeguards possible. May 18th, 19th, and 20th. We already have 3 sponsors looking for more. We're anticipating 100 speakers, 400 companies, 2 awards. We're adding the Entrepreneurship of the Year award to the Digital Hall of Fame award. We will have 1 showcase where there'll be 16 companies sharing their technologies. We're expecting 100,000 attendees. There will be 20 keynotes, 14 panels, followed by 14 white papers and 20 videos. We are all about industrial digitalization and all those themes, and cities and buildings and the like, and utilities. So last year, as you all know, we had a great participation of many companies, and you two were there as core, as you will be this year as well. And we want to thank Texas State University for sponsoring the Digital-Roundtable. When I get back to the thought of what's happening in cities, gentlemen, lots of stuff going on lately. There seems to be a renaissance around micromobility, sort of the scooters and all that. There are 7 companies that are doing interesting things. There are kind of key companies to watch, a company called Tortoise, and a company called Populous, and a company called Cord, and Ride Panda, and Mobilize, and Where is My Transport? And they're all attacking different things. One of the interesting new trends on opportunities for business is this whole notion of the curbside management, related also to parking management. There seems to be quite a bit of influence and influx in innovation in that sector. And I'm sure that you have tested the curbside delivery. My wife loves the one at Target. I actually, go to HEB and get my groceries on the curbside. So lots of stuff going on in smart cities. Additionally to that, there's another new area where venture capital is starting to invest things. And this whole notion of street and sidewalk management. And it's really a gamut of things, from the sidewalk talking to your watch to managing traffic flow, the flow of people, and the car and all this stuff. Very interesting new area of innovation. And then last but not least, there seems to be a big push going on nationwide on the technology called by the Boring Company, one of Elon Musk's companies. The Virgin Group, Branson had created a new company called the Virgin Hyperloop One Company. And they are pushing really hard to create new zones of mass transit using this boring technology by Elon. What are you guys' thoughts on what we can see here in the short term in terms of new scooter technologies? What's going to happen with curbside management, delivery, and anything else?
Well, I think cities have always been our lifeblood, and what goes on around cities has been our lifeblood. And I see a number of trends happening, and we can talk about what will happen with all of the curbside management, my watch speaking to the restaurant understanding where I am on the curbside, or if I'm sitting at the red light, so my food can be delivered, that when I drive up, my table is already there, the kind of wine I like is already there. But the biggest change in how we live will be the evolution of new cities. Some of these cities will be based on the architect of the old small town cities, and it will be much like New York. New York is a kind of model that we don't have much around the country. That is, people might work in the city, but they have houses up in northern New York and different kind of places to get out of the cities. Well, the biggest trend recently was the trend that was taking place when the Industrial Revolution developed. People were moving to cities, and they moved to cities because everything that they needed was there. With 5G and other kinds of transportation developing, I can see the emergence of new cities. In Texas, I see cities being around economic development and also being around class. We cannot dodge the class issue in America, and the fact that if people would say, I'm going to go buy an island, people are evolving cities where they can do their business in the cities. And then if they happen to go to a major metropolitan area like Austin, Texas, then it is there. So we look at how cities develop in Europe, how cities develop in America, but with 5G and the connectivity and given the virus and the disruptions, then I see the emergence of new cities either based on old architectures, old cities, or the redeployment of the digital economy to create entire new cities from scratch, smart buildings,
Right.
and it would be around smart people, those people who have prepared themselves to live in those cities. And older cities then will not lose out, but they will just be there. So those are the trends that I see.
Yeah. Llewelyn?
I think the critical thing is to improve city transportation. The city transportation we have all dates from the 19th century. The only difference is intercity transportation, where we have aeroplanes. Otherwise, city transportation, including subways, buses, trams, trains, are all 19th century. Some were pulled by horses before there were engines, but nonetheless, they go back a long way. The early cities, Roman, etc., were relatively small and relatively efficient. With the 19th century, you got the effects of the 18th century, the effects of the Industrial Revolution, people pouring into cities. In the United States, we had immigrants coming from overseas. They weren't going to go automatically to rural America. They had no means of getting there and nothing to do if they got there. So they ended up in places like the east side of New York. People poured into cities that were not prepared for them. And we've been in some sort of city chaos ever since. Our cities are chaotic. You go into any city before we got to this pandemic, and you get traffic chaos. And that includes your own beloved Austin, where you can spend a long time waiting in traffic. That is chaos. That is also a subtraction from the quality of life, indeed from the length of life. Sitting in an automobile after a while gets awfully boring, no matter how much you love to listen to the radio. I think scooters, the boring company, these are the exciting non-electromagnetic developments that I was talking about that are going to change everything, change the way we live. The electrification of air transportation may make a huge difference because we'll have hop-on, hop-off aerial transportation. Quite how it will work, we don't know. Remember, some things we think are always going to happen and they never do, like magnetic levitating trains. They haven't happened. Other things happen rather faster than we ever thought. The humble scooter has become a major urban source of transportation. So, be very careful predicting the future. All you know for certain is it will be different. It will not necessarily be an extrapolation of what we have today. The problem with the cities we have today is they are an extrapolation of the cities we had in the 19th century. Now, talking to Johnny's point, there have been attempts at garden cities around the world, but including the US, and independent cities, often adjacent to another city, so-called edge cities, have been somewhat effective, but their central issue has failed. And that was the thought that people would live and work in the same place. I used to live in Reston, Virginia, a wonderful place to live, but there are jobs there, but the people who live there don't take those jobs. They take jobs downtown Washington, and people in downtown Washington take jobs in Reston. So this kind of planning has its limits. People garden cities are a nice idea, but so far they have not succeeded. So far, big cities have attracted more people, more congestion, and we've hardly seen it in this country. We don't have 20 million people like Mexico City, or these cities that are just growing exponentially in Europe, I beg your pardon, not in Europe, but in Asia, with no hope of them being. We do need ways to make the cities we have more livable, and maybe, hopefully, if Johnny is right, get them to live in smaller, more commodious places.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, I was looking at the last Smart City Index, and I was looking at the top 100 cities, and actually, United States has, of all the countries that in the world, sophisticated countries, that we don't have a lot of population in our cities. Our cities are fairly small compared to any large country. I mean, New York is not even 20 million people, right? So the biggest cities are 40 million, 30 million, I think that our construct is fluctuating already, and we have this mass metro areas with 3 or 4 cities interconnected, and what you're discussing happens, you work in one, live in another, move around kind of thing. And I think that the question is, how do we do that more efficiently, right? And more effectively, and what kind of new jobs and new ways of, playing, working, eating, sleeping, evolve out of that scenario. I think Americans in general are against, this obsession of some countries of living, next to each other, really tight, super density. We don't have that. Never had it. The interesting thing will be what comes next with COVID and the pandemic and other things. But let me touch one point, because we have time, and I want your 2 cents on something. We have discussed it before, and maybe I would just want to go a little deeper on it. When I look at our construct as a globe, how cities were created in Rome and aqueducts, and then power was added later in America and so on. The way we build things is very organic, and it's very slow, and it's very one person at a time. And over time, call it piles or mountains of concentration happen, cities, metro areas, working farms and things that we call civilization happen. But our system of how we populate and we transform, develop a neighborhood, a grass field of cows, turn it into a neighborhood kind of thing, is very slow. Yet when we get pandemics, when we get tsunamis, when we get earthquakes, the devastation does not allow us to react, right? We could not evacuate, like they're trying to evacuate Congress. They can't evacuate 100 people or 400 people out of a building surrounded by 10,000 people. The way we function is very fragile. What do you think about that? I mean, are we for eventually a place where we just self-destruct because we are so fragile, our systems are so fragile? Is there a way to do better resiliency? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Hernando de Soto, one of my favorite economists, sociologists, wrote a book entitled Why Capitalism Survives in the West and Nowhere Else. And one of his major points was that we don't have any squatting in our city, which will make it more complicated for people to move. Everything is cataloged. So when I taught in Mexico City, there was entrepreneurship everywhere. There were people selling things everywhere, but because it was not legal, it was not cataloged, then you don't have the same kind of consequences. So therefore, the houses that they were in, they were squatting. They did not own them. The boxes that they were in and the land that they were squatting on, they did not own them. What we've done in America is, in his notion, is that everything is a category. There's not one piece of land that I can squat on in New York City or Austin, Texas, much like the great cities of the world where there are 50 million people. The reason why we only have 20 million people in New York is not because they ran out of land, but it's because everything is registered here. I could go squat around a city in India and sell pearls all day. I cannot do that in San Antonio, Texas. So what that does, it makes people, it's more difficult to move things around. It's more difficult to get people to say X, Y, and Z because, well, I own this. Well, in Mexico City, you just move the squatters out. So I think that's a good sort of an explanation. So therefore, but we have become very, very inefficient in the movement of people during crisis. I mean, you can look at everything from Katrina, you can look at everything from the fires in LA, you can look at all the houses that were burned, all the communities that our early warning systems, we have not developed that in America. And it has to do with this idea that, well, this is my lot, everything is legalized.
Well, I can't argue with that. I think you have very good points. And you also touch on the point which we've made on the show, talked about before, which is how do you harness random entrepreneurialism? I saw quite vividly on the streets of New Orleans. I've also seen it in Saigon and Mexico City. In Saigon, it's a way up, as it would here, one hopes, but not if you're a shoe shine man in New Orleans. We've got too many barriers. You can't start a shoe store, you can't do this, you don't know how to raise money, how to advertise, you don't know. You don't even know what to charge. Somehow this happens quickly and fairly fast. The learning curve is very swift in Asia, less so in our own cities here. Outside of that, you're quite right. We don't have spotting, and consequently, we don't have the random movement of people in great quantities the way they see it in Asia and in Africa and in Latin America. That is a very good point. Where you have property rights and everything is owned by someone and has some economic value, you both establish a desire to own, but also you frustrate the ability to get started. The threshold entry is there. In these other cities, there's no threshold of entry, but there's also no way out. because everybody has crossed over the threshold of entry and everybody's selling potatoes in the street or everybody is shining shoes. So these are really interesting challenges for which I don't think there are any elegant answers. We can look at the past and see how things were ordered there. And about the fragility, cities have always been fragile. London was nearly evacuated because of its sewage was so filthy, it was called the Great Stink. And in the 19th century, an engineer, whose name I don't recall, rebuilt it, built a sewage system, contained the Thames from being a 2 mile wide sewer into being the channeled river it is today. The Romans had to leave in the Greco-Roman city, Ephesus, in Turkey, had to be abandoned and was abandoned by its entire population because of malaria. They didn't understand that it was coming because their river was silted up and there was too much standing water. So they took the easy way out, or the hard way out, in fact. They abandoned this beautiful city. As a result, by the way, it's the most complete Greco-Roman city there is in the world. We've always had fragility. Our way of life is extraordinarily fragile. You and I, any of us, cannot survive a week. We wouldn't survive without water, which we have no natural source of. We can't go outside to a river of water. We cannot go and do the hunter-gathering thing because we live in cities. We are dependent on systems to deliver everything. Ergo, our life is extraordinarily fragile.
John, any more thoughts on that?
I think I agree with what Llewelyn has said, is that we have become dependent on the urban supply chain. From food.
Andres, you're going to have to do something about the program. Johnny and I are agreeing.
I know.
I agree with that. I mean,
I'm going to have to bring. I'm going to have to bring a topic that you guys disagree on.
Yes, I just think it's true. I was thinking that where I grew up in southern Louisiana, I could go hunting any day. I could go out
right
and find food, but here. I don't know. In Llewelyn, when I wake up, there are deer all over my yard, so I might have to disagree. I've got tons and tons of deer running through my yard. They run over me when I wake up.
I don't know what
now, they would put me in jail if I shot one, but they're there. Yes.
It's quite a business to shoot and skin an animal, but yeah, you could eat deer for a while. You'd be better off than most of us.
Yeah.
If you've got
not easy to skin a deer.
Successful, that life is pretty rough for most people in the urban environment, or even the old farmers used to be masters of everything. They were Renaissance people. They could, kill and butcher an animal, hang the meat, etc. Now it's all done by machines, and they don't know how to do it. That super skill, they could test the acidity of the soil, they could repair the tractor, they could do everything. But now we're all specialists. We can only do one damn thing, and it's probably not what's needed in an emergency.
We need to go back to the rule. You're right.
So it's been great to be back and have you guys. I look forward to 2021. I have a feeling. And I'm always the optimist on things, but I have a feeling that 2021 is going to see some serious acceleration on technology, and it's going to bring all kinds of issues, especially those that are disadvantaged, on how we bring them along into this new world of the Jetsons. It's getting to be made pretty quickly here. Got lots of stuff to share in the coming shows around what we're doing at Texas State on the Connected Infrastructure Labs that I'm working on, and look forward also to sharing more details as we bring guests that are going to be also speakers at the Digital 360 Summit. Johnny, if you have your guitar, you can send us away.
I got it. I've been thinking about looking about Texas. Only thing in life worth living. Guitars that's tuned well and good looking women. I don't need my name in the city lights. I got my guitar and I got you in my arms tonight. So maybe it's time we got back to the basis of life. Let's go to Lukenbach, Texas, with Wheeling, Whalen, and the boys. This successful life we're living got us feeling like the Hatfields and McCoys. Between Hank Williams' train song, Jerry Jefferson rain song, and Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Back in Lukenbach, Texas, ain't nobody feeling no pain. So Llewelyn, let's go to Lukenbach and get back to the rural way of life.
Thank you, gentlemen.